Hello guys, it's Jonathan here doing another Bottleman video. This time I want to ask the question, was Bottleman good? Now I know I've done a few videos like this already. I had kind of a trilogy of videos going over each and every Bottleman line asking if it was good, but this video, I'm just talking about the entire line. That said, I'm going to be focusing less on the individual Bottlemen themselves, because again, I've already covered that, I've already covered every single one in those videos. But I just want to do kind of an overview. I will say, if you haven't seen those, I would probably, recommend watching them after this if you want to know more about each one. But if you've already watched these, I hope that this does still give it some new insight to the line as a whole. But with that said, let's just go ahead and start getting into all of the specifics of this video. Alright, so let's go ahead and start off with the Bottleman systems. I feel like it's important to know what exactly each system does and just kind of how it works. So first up, we'll start with the prototype system, of course, which we have here. Here's a core. So of course you got the hold parts just kind of built in right here. Trigger in the back. Looks like this. It's pretty basic. Of course the cap sits on the top there, so yeah, anyway. As far as the other parts go, the headpiece, well, the eyes and stuff are kind of already molded in based on how these cores are, but there are head crests that do attach on the top that just kind of, work pretty simply. So, yeah, those are very nice. The feet here, they just kind of snap in, well, they just kind of slot in the front and snap in on the back there, so fairly, self-explanatory. You can just snap those in. And there's the arms, which they just kind of slot in pretty simply. Just kind of grooves on the hold parts here, and then these, yeah, they just kind of slide in, which is pretty simple. So it just works. I'm not getting into accessories or specific Bottleman, how they might change the system. I'm just going on the most basic examples possible here. It's a really straightforward system, yet pretty effective. There is one concern on these cores, though, which is this part here. There's like this buckle when assembling the cores, and yeah, this part here, because it's like on a curve and stuff, it is a little bit suspect when it comes to, its durability, but we'll talk more about its durability and quality control later on, but I do want to mention that right now. Moving on from the prototype line, we then get to the DX line. So these cores are a bit different, because, well, they're kind of two parts in a sense, because you have the core here. This can provide potential magazine and barrel ports, as this one does have a barrel port. Also the hold parts on this. And you have the trigger, which is now separate, and this you just kind of slot in the back, and it just kind of, I think it's set upside down. Wait, am I okay over here? Yeah, no. Anyway, so yeah, it just kind of like screws in and whatnot. It's pretty self-explanatory. It's not that difficult to do, except if you're me making this video, which apparently I just can't get this correct on camera, but whatever. It's simple. You just screw them in. Yeah, this works. And I think it's a good way to kind of change out the cores. I do wish maybe they would have gone crazier on the trigger gimmicks. I think that could have been nice, but it is a little bit limited in some senses, but I do think they could have maybe gone a little bit further than what they ended up doing, because we didn't have many triggers that were very interesting. What was it, like Kerpeps and Ayawashi? There wasn't really a whole lot. I guess maybe Dakapian, Dragogina, that one's like specialized and different, but yeah. Still, cool idea, I guess. As far as the extra pieces go, the feet are very, very similar. Again, just kind of slots in the front, and then could snap in to the back part of the core. Pretty standard. Also, there's no heads, since these cores are, a bit more flat and horizontal, so you don't have the vertical part with the face sticker. So now you have entire head pieces with a cap on them usually, and yeah, these just kind of, you just put them on, and then they just kind of clamp down and snap into place. But yeah, fairly standard. Now the arms are a bit different. You now, instead of putting them on the hold parts, they have these little tabs up here, which, yeah, you just take the arms and they just kind of slot in, and you just push them down, and yeah. Pretty easy to do, but again, like the prototype line, there is a bit of a concern here. Except this time it's not with the core itself, with how it's connected. With swapping out the arms, these pieces, you can tell, are kind of thin. There is a bit of reinforcement behind them, but you can probably see that this could potentially be a bit brittle. It wasn't really a big deal in DX, but it did become a bigger issue in Godcap with a certain Bottleman, which we'll get to later, but yeah. Regardless, this is a bit concerning, so I'm not the biggest fan of that. But I do think the system was a natural evolution to the prototype line. I just kind of wish that maybe they could have found out a better idea for how the arms would attach. That would have been very, very nice. Now we get to Godcap. Godcap is very similar to DX, but the cores are molded differently, because now the cores are just two separate parts. You have the front part of the cores, which are now they have the hold parts and potential for barrel ports, and the back part of the cores have triggers and potential for magazine ports. Both can have gimmicks or whatever if you want them to, but yeah. This, in my opinion, was not a good step for the line. By doing this, well, I think the trigger piece just could have been its own thing, as it was in DX. Maybe change how it works to potentially add more gimmicks to it, but I think that the base idea was there. With this, you now have the potential for a magazine port on the back here, which is just absolutely broken. Because triggers weren't overly interesting in Godcap, you now basically just have back pieces that are just, well, do you want a magazine port or not? Well, obviously you want one, so yeah, in some sense you could say, oh, well, it kind of opens up the opportunity for more Bottlemen to have, magazines. Great. The problem is that now most of the other cores are just absolutely worthless, at least the back halves, so I don't think this is a good step for the line. Aside from that, the head, the arms, and the feet, they all just work the exact same as DX, so no reason to go back over those, yeah. As far as the systems go, I think they had a pretty good idea, but each line just has just something wrong with it. And the prototype line, I think, again, they just couldn't quite nail the core structure. Those buckles are just not in a good spot. DX, they made a lot of improvements, but again, they just couldn't get those arm tabs right. I think those were not well designed. They're not really easy to take on and put off either. They sometimes just have too much resistance. It's not great. And then Godcap keeps that issue, but also now has the core split, which I don't particularly think was a great move on their part. I think that they should have had a different route here. If they want to do something like this, focus more on different hold parts or trigger gimmicks, and just have everything have a barrel and magazine port at that point, just to resolve the issue. But yeah, it wasn't the best. Yeah, in terms of system design, they're not bad, but there's just at least one issue with every single line. At least I feel as if there is. Now we move on to Bottleman design. I'm not going to go too far into this, but yeah. In terms of how they designed Bottleman, I think they did a pretty good job. A lot of Bottlemen, were pretty normal. You had your fair share of kind of basic ones, like something like Mario DX here. Got the arms that make for a nice little grip. You put some tension on these hands here, which works nicely with, the drive strip being power type hold parts. It just works as a fine gimmick. A lot of other Bottlemen just have, gimmicks to them that are a little bit more interesting, but again, kind of one note. But then you do have your fair share of more interesting Bottlemen, like, for example, here, Kokoryu OG. This thing, of course, has a, you have a magazine, a barrel, kind of swap around like the dragon head and put it wherever. You have different arms, you could use these, or like the power type arms, but if you use these, you could have like a small cap shooter up here. There's a lot you could do. Of course, some other crazy ones like, Cole OG being insane, or Drive Regina DX, or even some of the fusions like, Royal Griffin DX, or, Ryujin Blend Dragon. There's a lot of crazy stuff in Bottleman, so I do appreciate the designs. Again, it makes sense to have some, more normal ones, of course, which is most of them. But I think it does a good job at balancing, having more normal Bottlemen with some of the more interesting ones, like, again, Kokoryu OG here. And when it does want to ramp things up, I think they do a very, very good job. So that's kind of all to say about the Bottleman designs themselves. I know it's very, very brief, but again, I have already gone over everything before, so I don't want to just repeat myself here and reiterate the same things. So again, that's kind of where those other videos come in, because I go over everything there, so yeah. But as far as the actual designs and how they did Bottleman go, I think they did a very good job overall, and there really isn't too much else to say about it. Alright, let's talk about remakes now. Remakes started in Bottleman DX. So there were some references in the prototype line, like the, well, prototype Bottleman core. Did have the same eyes as Fighting Phoenix. Also, there were a couple sets that had things based on Wild Wyvern and Stag Sphinx. But these were just kind of colors based on them with the eye stickers based on them. We didn't get our first full-on remake until Bottleman DX with Bottle Phoenix DX, which is of course just kind of a, Colomar DX recolor with, its own unique stickers. This is just kind of how Bottleman DX handled remakes, with the exception of Bottle Wyvern DX having a slightly different core than normal, of course being a controlled type, well, having a, control hold parts on a speed type core, which wasn't really meant to be unique to this Bottleman. It was just kind of the overall theming of how they did Random Collection Volume 2. But yeah, outside of that, yeah, DX just had kind of basic remakes. Godcap, we started getting a lot more as well, and with DX, we only had one for most of the line. It wasn't until, again, Random Collection Volume 2 towards the end where we got another one, and then, of course, kind of in the time where they weren't really making new DX Bottlemen, but before Godcap, they just, I guess, threw out some more remakes as fillers. That's fine. Godcap had more remakes than, actual Bottleman releases. That was a bit of an issue. The remakes there, they started to do some different stuff. Like, Cobalt Bottle G not having the big cap launcher and stuff. Bottle Wyvern G having a different type of cap than Samet's G. Same thing with Bottle Sphinx G, which even had its own unique cap as well. And also, each of these kind of had unique parts of the head. Not fully different heads, just like a couple changes here and there. And then, of course, you have something like Bottle Phoenix G, which is kind of based on Kokoriro G, but with just the power-type whole parts, and also, or not whole parts, power-type arms, plus an entirely new headpiece and a different cap. Things like, Bottle Soryo G and Bottle Koryo G having different caps, also just kind of being stripped down versions of Kokoryo G, not having the accessories, plus Bottle Koryo had a slightly different head with the different horns, kind of like some of the other Godcap remakes. And of course, Cobalt Bottle Fire G, kind of being a mix of things from like, Kokoryo, Draggart, having its own cap. It was a weird mix of stuff, but yeah, anyway. The remakes themselves, I think, were pretty okay. I think some of them were not done well. I think things like CCXL and DX needed to have a different base, at least partially. Or like, the Cobalt, I think the Draggart head was a horrible, horrible choice. Way too angular for something like Cobalt, which I think had a fairly round head, all things considered. And Draggart is not that at all. Definitely some mismanaging of the remakes, and I think, again, there were too many, especially in Godcap. I think a good way to handle remakes would have been to kind of pull from Beyblade Burst, and maybe make some remake sets. For example, look at DX, okay? There were, I guess we'll discount, CC Excellion DX, but just looking at these Super Beat'em remakes, you had 4 of them, right? I think you could have gotten away with just releasing one of them, Bottle Phoenix DX, maybe Battle Wyvern in the running collection, but I think you could have also done like, Konig or Preps DX and, Bottle Phoenix Energy DX, and maybe even made a Stag Sphinx remake in DX instead of Godcap. But those 3 could have just been thrown into a set being exclusive to said set. Because let's be honest, not everyone wants the remakes, but the people who do want them are definitely going to get them. Are probably older, so I think making them in an anniversary set would have made much more sense. I think they should have done that. I think they should have had less remakes in the line, especially during Godcap. Maybe just a couple here and there, but again, you could have definitely made the sets, which could have also made even more remakes if you wanted to, which I don't imagine are overly difficult to do. And you don't clog up the line as much. I think it would have been much better to do that rather than clogging up the line. And also, it just kind of gives you one place to get all of them. I just think it would work nicely. I don't hate remakes. I definitely hated them more while Godcap was still going on because there was just so many of them. But at this point, yeah, I think that they did an okay job with remakes themselves. Definitely some misses here and there, though. Wish maybe they would have made some new parts more often to make the remakes better. And again, definitely should have handled the release scheduling of them much better because, yeah, it wasn't handled great overall. Yeah, remakes were just a thing they did that were, and they didn't do them well, but they didn't do them horribly either. They just kind of existed there, honestly. Okay, it's time to talk about quality control. This is a huge issue with Bottleman. So, Bottleman started off using a Chinese factory, which is very important to note. This will come into play later, but yeah. Started by using a Chinese factory, and there were some immediate issues. The Bottleman, the way they shot the caps and just the grooves on the caps were a bit, thicker, a little bit more, space between each ridge. And, yeah, the whole parts, the plastic wasn't the greatest, so sometimes there was a bit of a crunch when shooting. Also, again, going back to kind of the cores, the original versions of the cores with the Chinese factory were very prone to break, especially the translucent ones. This buckle right here was especially bad for breakages. Now, during this era, we also had some oddities. For example, Fusion Black. I'm not going to go through every single Bottleman with an issue, but we'll go through some of the more notable ones. Fusion Black, its headpiece here just... it fell off way too easily. So yeah, there were definitely some issues early in Bottleman, but post-Fusion Black they did eventually switch to the Vietnamese factory, which was a much better factory for the most part. The hold parts and caps were better, like the hold parts just felt like better plastic, and also the caps, the ridges on the caps were a bit smaller and a bit closer together, so there wasn't as much kind of extra unnecessary tension on the caps, and it didn't really or impact performance either. Having less tension, you might think like, oh, well, wouldn't that make it potentially weaker? It really didn't. Wasn't really an issue with that. It's just kind of extra crunch that they had that didn't need to be there, and they kind of got rid of that. But as far as the Vietnamese factory goes, it wasn't perfect. There were definitely some issues. For example, look at Samus G. There was definitely a lack of care when designing these arms. You're supposed to be able to put a second cap back here, but when you shoot, these arms kind of flare out a bit and the cap goes flying half the time. Also, the trigger tends to jam pretty easily. If you shoot like this, it doesn't come back fully out. You have to pull it back. Not just mine, I've seen this with other ones as well. Also, CC Leon, this thing, also just a lack of care when making this, because again, if you use this gimmick as intended, which is kind of this like almost protractor-like gimmick where you're supposed to be able to turn the Bottleman to shoot at different angles, eventually it just kind of comes apart. Something needed to give here to make this better, but yeah, was not a well-made gimmick. That's kind of a problem. Aside from just quality control issues, there's definitely just some lack of care at times when designing these things. And moving into DX, again, I did mention that these are a bit suspicious here, these tabs. We'll come back to these later, though. As far as DX goes, there were some other issues. For example, let me just grab my two other examples here. Alright, so CC Leon DX, this thing had a head issue. This head just doesn't attach properly. Tends to fall off a little bit too easily. It's not something that happens all the time when you're just like firing, but yeah, it can do that, which is a bit unfortunate. So yeah. Also, regarding Griffin DX, this thing is just very, very janky all around, honestly. Like, everything feels like it just wants to, like these caps especially, everything feels like it wants to fall off. I don't know, this thing just doesn't feel like it was made very well. And then we get to Bottleman Godcap. This is where we really get a lot of issues, because Godcap switched back to the Chinese factory permanently. And, well, a lot of those issues came back. Hold parts became kind of gritty again. The plastic just felt a bit more rough, and it felt way worse than the prototype Bottleman, in my opinion. The caps went back to how they used to be with those kind of larger, more spaced out ridges. These caps felt really, really crunchy to shoot, and it just wasn't pleasant. And yeah, also, again, with kind of worse quality, you can imagine that these parts right here might become a little bit more concerning. And we saw that in full effect with Kokoribo G. I'm not taking this thing apart because it'll probably break if I do. But yeah, these arms, yeah, they, I've heard some about them being slightly smaller, and I kind of don't know about that. I think they're pretty normal, but the fact that you have a translucent core, when you take these off, a very, very high chance that it's just going to break. These arm connection points on the core are prone to breaking. And it just sucks. Because it's very, very common for this thing to just break. God Captures had a lot of issues. I'm not going over everything, but yeah, there were just a lot of small issues with GodCap and its quality control. It doesn't matter which factory they use, each one just had quite a bit of quality control issues. A lot of times it just came from a lack of care, but there were just some, again, genuine plastic quality issues as well. That was more so the Chinese factory. The Vietnamese factory is pretty good about that. But again, there was just some lack of care. They just didn't fix certain issues, or certain things just maybe shouldn't, or should have been better. Just didn't work quite right. And we saw these from both factories, but yeah, the Chinese factory definitely had some plastic quality issues. And again, we see that with something like Okuroji, which I know a lot of people who have broken theirs when trying to take off these arms because they just don't work as they're supposed to. So yeah, quality control was a massive, massive issue when it comes to Bottleman as a whole. Another thing about Bottleman that was a bit problematic was its release schedule. Well, this isn't really an issue now because it's done. I honestly think it harmed the franchise quite a bit. Early on, there was a lot of hype for Bottleman, but quickly after Bottleman started in January 2021, well, it started in October 2020, but in January 2021 we got Fusion Black, and we did not get another mainline Bottleman until July of 2021. 6 months later, we got Skull Pistol. Yeah, we got recolors between that, but there wasn't a proper new Bottleman. I think they actually harmed the line quite a bit. After this, there would be a bit of consistency issues, but we would kind of do okay. And eventually, yeah, we'd finish out with the prototype line in January 2022 pretty well, without too many issues. And then we wouldn't get anything until April of 2022 with Bottleman DX. It kind of seemed like there was more hype for the line again. I noticed a lot of people seemed excited, but I feel like there was a drop-off again, because we did not get another release at all from Bottleman until July 2022. It was a 3-month gap between getting anything at all. They started a new line, had some hype, and then they kind of ruined it because we just didn't get anything. While the rest of 2022 was great, 2023 was a bit of an issue. God Kept started in March of 23, and after that, I mean, well, we didn't really get another mainline Bottleman until June. There was a remake in April, but it's not really anything new. We got some stuff in July, a remake in August, and nothing in September. We did get a remake and an actual, important Bottleman, Cola OG in October, but after that, I mean, November was just like that was Sprite Ninja, it was just like a throw together combo that it claims to be a new motif. December was, just a bunch of remakes. In January 2024, our final release of Bottleman was, Welch Great G, just another kind of throw together combo that claims to be a new motif. The release schedule of this line, I think, was just horrible. I think, especially, that 6-month gap in 2021 really harmed the series a lot. I think that, kind of just not getting anything new for so long kind of hurt its chances of doing well. I also think that, Bottleman DX had a chance to kind of rectify this, but again, they just failed to by having 3 months of just absolutely nothing. I think the release schedule is something that nowadays, again, doesn't really matter, but I think when you look at the potential success of Bottleman, I think this actually harmed it quite a bit, because they just could not be consistent to save their lives, and again, I think, well, it just kind of overall harmed the entire line. And next up on my list is game design. And to that I say, what game design? Bottleman just completely failed on this front. Historically, there were a lot of games, like, Break Bomber, or Battle Beat'em, probably one of the coolest games of all time, with, of course, DHB. Bottleman just failed miserably. They had the whole digital battle set or whatever at the start of Bottleman, which had, like, the Switch game integration. Cool idea, wasn't executed well. I think you could have done a lot more with this, and they just didn't want to put the effort in. I feel like this ended up being just kind of scrapped pretty quickly. After this, they had those 2 sets, the challenge sets in April 2021, with the each one has like the Super Beat-On based prototype core with it. These sets, again, you have games with them, but they're not interesting. They're not like a big game. After that, like, the only thing we really got that was interesting was the Sapphire and Blast Boss. That was actually pretty cool. Blast Boss, a moving target. Have to shoot at it to, beat it. It's pretty cool. It's nothing crazy, but it's a cool thing to have. But with Bottleman DX, we really needed a new big game. So it seemed like they were kind of moving from the digital battle set. We need something, and we just didn't get that. There wasn't anything really of note here that was new or interesting. They had their whole entry set, but that didn't do much. What else was there outside of that? Nothing. Godcap, I think, was even worse with its entry set. And again, there was really no attempt to make a proper game for this line at all. It's like you're just supposed to shoot these at targets, and that was really all you were meant to do. In terms of game design, Bottleman just failed miserably. It seems like they might have had a concept early on, but again, they just scrapped it and never tried to replace it. I don't know what happened here. It was just horribly done. And they needed some kind of game to really keep this alive. They completely failed on this front, and again, I think it really hurts the line to not have any kind of game to play with these. And well, yeah, again, there were games, they just weren't that interesting. Again, you needed something to keep the attention of people. I think DHB would have been a great option here, especially by DX if they, maybe they had a different idea for the prototype line that they shifted gears from. DHB would have been a great idea. Again, we just didn't get that, and I think, again, that would have been great. But yeah, overall, not getting anything, like any meaningful game. Again, it just really, really harms this line a lot. And lastly, how was Bottleman kind of as an evolution to Beat 'em On? Well, we're not going to talk much about the physical design because obviously, each Beat 'em On line has its own sort of thing. So let's just talk about kind of the caps, right? How was it to have caps instead of marbles? Well, right off the bat, this was a bad decision. Well, it was interesting because, well, caps, it's different, but also, yeah, you can have, horizontal caps, but sometimes you even have, vertical caps. That's a difference right there you could make, but, caps, here's the problem. They're just not versatile. Marbles, they're balls. They're small balls, which you can do almost whatever you want with these things. Again, look at, there are magazines you have. There are so many different types of magazines with, Beat 'em On. You had so many different styles, and they were really cool. But with Bottleman, you can't really do that, because caps are limiting. And also, the Quick Loader magazine from, Battle Beat 'em On was pretty cool, but look at, CC Land DX. This thing is enormous because you have to fit caps inside of there. Yeah, caps just really limited a lot of things, and again, because you have to have them specifically oriented, it just makes it difficult to deal with. Loading these things is also more annoying. Firing them, I think, is even a bit worse as well. There's just a lot of problems with having caps that marbles did not have. Again, the only real interesting thing you get, aside from just having a different type of ammo, with caps opposed to marbles, is the fact that you can have the horizontal vertical split, which is not worth it in my opinion. It's not like they even did a whole lot of interesting stuff with the vertical stuff anyway, if we're being honest, so there wasn't much of a reason to have this. And also, another big problem with Bottleman is because caps are so much bigger than marbles, you then force these things to be bigger. Again, a prototype Bottleman, which by all standards isn't all that big compared to, Bottleman as a whole, it's quite a bit bigger than the average beat 'em on, I would say. At least a decent bit. And this thing, yeah, for me, I have giant hands. I'm very, just large in that sense. Yeah. For me, this works. Because having a larger Bottleman is nice. And if you're an adult, I think, yeah, you can definitely say that having these larger, pieces, it works well. But I think there is a limit to where it starts to become a problem. I think the prototype line, again, it's okay enough, right? We're fine. But then you get to DX, and again, DX kind of upped the size of it. You can just tell right off the bat that, this thing is a decent bit bigger. And I think this immediately causes some problems. Yeah, this thing, it's not bad, but when you start getting into your, crazier designs, you have a problem. Look at Royal Griffin DX, a fusion here. What am I even supposed to make of this thing? Yeah, sure, I can hold this thing just fine, but would a kid, or even just someone who has maybe a bit smaller hands, are they going to be able to hold this thing fine? I'm not so sure about that. This thing is absolutely just huge, because the cores have to be much larger than average in order to accommodate caps. And again, I mentioned this earlier, but again, something like, CC Land DX, this magazine is just large because, again, they have to accommodate caps, not small marbles. And I think that, again, just upping the size of these things makes it very difficult. Because, again, well, yeah, something like the prototype Bottleman, this is larger than an average read mount, potentially, but it's not really so much larger to be a concern. But when you start getting these more interesting gimmicks, especially with magazines, since they have to, house caps, it becomes a problem. When you start getting fusions and have multiple cores, like, again, earlier in DX, it becomes a problem. So I think that, again, aside from just caps being far more limiting and that being an issue, I think, again, the size was also a big issue. And while it didn't start off as too big of a deal, it definitely became one over time. Even with, for me, some of these things started to feel a little bit awkward. And I'm like 6'7". I have giant hands. If I'm having problems with these things, a normal person is probably also going to have problems with these things, and I can't imagine being a kid trying to handle something like Royal Griffin DX or, Cola OG without having any troubles at all, or feeling like it's potentially a bit uncomfortable. I just don't think that this was a good idea. Having marbles was a far, far easier thing to manage, and I just don't think changing the caps was the right move at all, and again, it harms the line quite a bit. And now it's time for the verdict. With everything I've said, was Bottleman good? No, it wasn't. That said, it wasn't bad either. There were a lot of redeeming qualities. Again, it's not something I went into much with this video, but the individual Bottleman designs I think were actually pretty good for the most part. I think they had a lot of cool stuff, and some of these Bottlemen got really crazy and interesting. I mean, look at things like, Drivogena DX or, Cola OG. Those things were crazy. I liked them a lot. Medium Fair Share, kind of more normal Bottlemen. There was a lot of cool stuff here, but I just think that overall, they missed the mark in a lot of other ways. And even just with the Bottlemen themselves, like, we didn't get much, we didn't really get many accessories, especially separately. We didn't really get anything like that. I think we really could have used some extra stuff like that, and we didn't get it. So that's still not perfect. But like everything else here, yeah, the systems themselves were mostly okay, but they still had some kind of issue somewhere. Remakes started to get out of hand eventually and weren't handled the best. The release schedule definitely harmed the success of this line. I mean, the game design and quality control, man, these were bad issues. I mean, again, with quality control, it started off pretty bad. They fixed it, but then we went backwards eventually with Godcap, which was just stupid, and the blast quality was horrible. Even then, there were just a lot of careless mistakes that they never bothered to fix. For example, like I mentioned earlier with the whole head issue with CC Land DX, for those of you who don't know, this thing got multiple reprints. Like, there was the lottery version, there was also, CC Excellion DX, didn't fix it, and then they had a chance in Godcap to fix it with a different factory and stuff, with, potential factory shift, which I don't think they really did. I think they still just, stuck to the Vietnamese factory for that stuff. But anyway, they could have done something to fix, Sprite and G, since it was reusing CC Land DX's head. They didn't. Even though it came out like a year and a half after CC Land DX, they did not opt to fix the head. A lot of careless mistakes, and again, they just didn't fix them. I just didn't think they felt like they had to, so yeah. A lot of stupid mistakes right there. Again, the game design was non-existent. And again, caps, well, it's an interesting experiment. They just clearly did not work nearly as well as they needed to take the place of marbles. Yes, individually, each Bottleman is cool, and we've seen some jank before in Beat 'em On, so some of that stuff isn't new. And you at least have cool Bottleman, with cool gimmicks and interesting ideas here. But then you have nothing to really do with them. There's no interesting games with these things. And again, you're also just more limited with what you can do with them, with caps and stuff. I feel like they just missed the mark in too many ways for me to say that this was a good line. I don't think it was bad, although I think it actually borders on being bad, because again, the only redeeming quality, are the Bottlemen themselves and what they kind of bring to the table. But again, because that is such an important thing, I do feel like it still saves it from being considered bad. But with all the other issues, the fact that you don't have enough to do with them, the cap shift, just the overall quality problems and stuff, I definitely cannot call this good. And I do think overall, if I were to decide between good and bad, just black or white, I would say it was bad. There's just too many problems. So that said, do I want a Bottleman Gen 2? No. I want them to go back to marbles after this. I think it was an interesting experiment, but I think marbles are just the way to go for various reasons. I do hope they at least try to learn from this, and maybe take some of the ideas we saw in Bottleman and kind of port them over to a potential new beat 'em engine. I think that could be really, really cool. And there's definitely a lot of potential here. Again, something like, a marble version of Dragogena or Cola OG. Those things would be crazy. I'd love to see something like that. Again, maybe fix the scaling a bit, but, there were a lot of really cool ideas here. So yeah, there are definitely some stuff to take away from Bottleman in a positive way, but I just think as a gen, wasn't great. Hopefully for next gen, again, you take the positives and keep those, but you definitely need to learn from the mistakes, especially with gameplay. Can we get some actual games, please, if we get a new gen of Beat 'em on? Also, just bring back DHB. Why limit this to Battle Beat 'em on? Anyway, yeah, yeah, that's it for Bottleman. That's what I thought of it. I don't think it was great. I did enjoy my time with it for sure, though. Definitely had fun with it. At least, well, in the latter half of 2022 when Bottleman DX was at its peak. But yeah, it was fun overall. I do hope that we eventually do get a new gen of Beat 'em on, and hopefully it's sooner rather than later. But I guess we'll see what happens. But for now, Bottleman had some cool stuff, but overall, I just think they missed the mark in too many categories for this to truly be anything great. So, that said, that's all for this video, so thanks for watching, and bye-bye.